United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Is Jim outside?
Who?
Is he outside talking to the press? Jim?
No, Jim.
Jim.
I don't know. No, Preston was talking to the press. Thank you all for coming. Let me start by saying that we have some housekeeping items to take care of first. Before we get to that, I will introduce the Development Review Board. To my furthest right is Preston Bristow. Next to Preston is Gary Koger. Next to Gary is Harry Goodell. This is James Carroll, our town attorney. My name is Bob Greenfield. To my left is Scott McDonald. To Scott's left is Phil Perla. And to Phil's left is Kathy Hasbrook, our recording secretary. I would like to reiterate again that I hope we are all civil this evening, and if things get too warm, we'll go outside and cool off. We have a lot to cover, a lot to do, and we're going to be adults about it. A couple things I would like to state. Today is does anybody have any comments other than what we're here for a hearing about? Anybody like to make any comments whatsoever? Excuse me?
Happy Halloween.
Today is October 11th, 2023, and the time is 6:03 p.m. Everybody signed in? All righty. We're not going to ask you to take the oath just yet. We have minutes from an October 5th meeting that we need to adopt. Anybody have a chance to look at those, Gary? Scott? Yes. Take a motion to accept the minutes as presented.
So moved.
Moved by Phil. Seconded by Scott. Any discussion regarding those minutes? Any additions, corrections, deletions? Hearing none. All in favor of accepting the minutes?
Aye.
Thank you. All right. Now we'll move on to the hearing that we're all here for. This is hearing number 594, Julia Materials, Allstone Quarries at Route 103 North, 137 Chandler Road, and 3643 Route 103 North. Do any board members have a conflict of interest regarding this hearing?
No, sir.
Has any board members have any ex parte communication regarding this hearing? Hearing none. Those that wish to testify, you please stand and raise your right hand, and I'll have our town council swear you in. Before we get started, if you don't testify, if you don't swear, you can't testify. Thank you.
So if you'd raise your right hand, and do you solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence I give in the cause under consideration shall be the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God, or under the pains and penalties of perjury? Okay. Thank you.
We have a number of exhibits that need to be entered into the record, and we have pages of exhibits that have already been entered into the record. So let's start entering into these. Exhibit number HH, the Allstone Noise Assessment Addendum dated October 2023.
Move to accept.
Moved by Phil,
Second.
Second by Harry. All in favor of accepting Exhibit HH
Can I just, if it's all right, before actually moving, we got a motion and second on the floor. I think it would be a good idea just to make sure that there's nobody in the room that would have an objection to the admission of the exhibit as submitted.
Any discussion, objection to?
Hearing none? we can-
We have one. You need to take a microphone, ma'am, please,
Where would we find these minutes?
on the website?
On the DRB?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
We're moved by Phil, second by Harry. All in favor?
Aye.
I'm sorry, what was the
That was
exhibit number was?
HH.
Okay, thanks.
We have exhibit number 18, motion for issuance of a subpoena by Scott Kilgus and Leslie Thorson.
I move it.
Moved by Harry,
Second.
second by Phil. Any discussion regarding that exhibit? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. We have exhibit number 19, which is a response to motion for issuance of subpoenas by Mark Hall,
Move it.
moved by Harry,
Second.
second by Phil. Any discussion regarding the response to the issuance of subpoena by Mark Hall? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
I have exhibit number 20, a Scott Kilgus affidavit of October 11th, 2023,
Move it.
moved by Harry,
Second.
second by Phil. Any discussion regarding the Scott Kilgus affidavit of today? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
So moved. We have some documents of record. Exhibit P1, South Quarry State Land Use Permit Number 2S0775-1, dated 21 June 2005.
Move it.
Moved by Harry,
Second.
second by Phil. Any discussion regarding South Quarry State Land Use Permit of June 2005? We have Exhibit P, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Exhibit P2, South Quarry Town Conditional Use Permit dated the 29th of September, 2003.
I'll move to move it.
Move to accept by Harry,
Second.
second by Phil. Any discussion regarding Exhibit P2, the conditional use permit from the 29th of September, 2003? All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
We have Exhibit P3, North Quarry Shed Zoning Permit dated 29th day of May 2001.
Move it, please.
Moved by Harry,
Second.
second by Phil. Any discussion regarding the North Quarry Shed Zoning Permit? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Exhibit number P4, Chandler Road Quarry Zoning Permits. There are multiple of them.
Move it.
Moved by Harry,
Second.
second by Phil. Any discussion regarding Chandler Road Quarry zoning permits? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
We have Exhibit P5, which is a sewage permit number for 3681 Vermont Route 103 North, dated the 3rd of July, 2007.
Move it. Second.
Moved by Harry, second by Phil. Any discussion regarding sewage permit regarding 3681 Vermont Route 103 North? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
I have a DRB decision, an order, motion for issuance of orders or subpoenas issued 10/10/2023.
Move it.
Moved by Harry, second by Phil. Any discussion regarding the decision and order for motion of issuance of orders or subpoenas issued 10/10/2023. Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. That's the exhibits in motion. Is there any?
The only other thing I can think of, Mr. Chairman, is the decision in order with regard to the subpoenas. Talked about providing documents numbers 1 through 12. I think it was anticipated that perhaps they might be provided today,
Okay.
but I understand from
So,
a conversation I had with Mr. Hall that perhaps, Ms. Eaton, you have a request as far as that's concerned?
Yes, if I may, there was a decision on 10/10 in response to the subpoena that requested the documents 1 through 12 be submitted to this body for tonight's hearing in anticipation of.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you on the Zoom. You have to speak up.
Is this better?
Yes, thank you.
So to repeat what I just said, my name is Pam Eaton. I'm here on behalf of Mark Hall. The decision on the subpoena was emailed to Attorney Hall at 5:10 p.m. yesterday. It requested a response of the documents for today's hearing. Attorney Hall was undergoing a medical procedure today, and so he worked to get some of the documents to the board ahead of time in advance of tonight's hearing, but he was unable to get all of them in. I believe he requested a 1-week extension to provide the rest of the documents, the remaining documents, and I understand that it seemed like that request would be granted based on the fact that he had a medical appointment today, that some of the documents have already been provided, and some of the other documents had been provided prior to the issuance of the subpoena on a voluntary basis. So there are some documents that have been provided and others that are to be continued.
when do you plan to have those documents ready?
He asked for a 1-week extension, so if today is
That would be the 18th of October?
That's correct, the 18th. So it would be in advance of the next hearing, which is scheduled for the 23rd. So it would still be well in advance of that hearing.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Could you grab a microphone?
Claire Gassens.
You need to speak into the microphone.
Michael Claire Gassens. I'm just interested in who was the last speaker. I didn't hear her identify herself.
Her name is Pam Heaton, I believe. Heaton, she represents Mark Hall, the attorney for Allstone.
That's
And
correct.
we issued a subpoena yesterday for documentation, and because Attorney Hall was undergoing medical procedure, he asked for a 1-week extension. That subpoena is on our website, will be on our website, is on our website, so you can see what we've asked for.
Thank you very much.
I'll move that we,
If Jim or, well, maybe moving it is a good idea first, if you want to do that.
I move that we grant a 1-week extension until October 18th for the remaining documents that were requested in our subpoena.
Second that.
Moved by
I'm sorry.
Moved by Phil, second by Harry. Discussion regarding that? Hearing none?
I don't know if you
All in
want
favor?
to be heard from me at this point.
Yeah, I think, Jim, if you've got a comment or something you want to put on the record with regard to the motion. Did you hear the motion?
I did, thank you.
Any discussion, Jim?
Yes, thank you. I'm participating by Zoom. It seems to be working out okay as long as everybody speaks into a microphone. And I know Mr. Matoski plans to be playing golf at the time of the next hearing, which I'm not opposed to, but I'd like to reserve my questions for Mr. Matoski until we have all the documents, and he can participate by Zoom at that time.
We agreed to that previously.
Okay. Thank you.
I didn't hear his response.
Speak into the mic.
I will not be golfing that day, but I will be by participating by Zoom.
Thank you.
All right.
So, take a vote, I guess.
Yep. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Thank you. You're good till the 18th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And maybe just, if nobody else heard, Ms. Eaton is here tonight on behalf of the applicant and works with Mark Hall at Paul Franklin Collins, just so everybody knows who Ms. Eaton is.
All right. Any questions from the RB? Jeremy, you have,
No comments on the procedure, but we can start the testimony if you want.
go for it.
All right. Again, my name is Jeremy Matoski. I'm the engineer for the project, Trudell Consulting Engineers. And with me tonight is Eddie Duncan, our noise expert from Resource Systems Group. And he will be here to explain, as I mentioned last time, the extent of the work that he's done to date on the project, as well as the latest addendum to the report that he had previously submitted along with the application. And just one further point on the documents. We did provide documents from my perspective for the testimony that Mr. Dumont wants me to talk about tonight. So I'm prepared to respond to those questions if he has them tonight. If he wants to wait for more documents, that's fine too.
Okay.
So I'm going to turn it over to Eddie.
Can everyone on Zoom hear me?
Could you state your name, please? Yes.
My name is Eddie Duncan.
Oh, thank you.
My name's Eddie Duncan, and I am a senior director at RSG. RSG stands for Resource Systems Group, and we are headquartered in White River Junction, Vermont. We have offices in Burlington and around the country. I am also a board-certified noise control engineer through the Institute of Noise Control Engineering and a member of the Acoustical Society of America. And I've been practicing acoustics for a little over 20 years, with much of that experience in local and state permitting processes here in Vermont. I've also done noise assessments and noise research across the country, but since we are headquartered here, I do have a bit of experience before local boards like yourself, Act 250, environmental court, and things of that nature. Much of that experience locally is in the rock quarry, gravel pit, aggregate industry, and so I have quite a bit of experience locally in the state doing this type of work, the type of assessments that we did for this project.
A little bit, they're saying that they can't hear you that great.
I'll move it right there. Okay, thank you. I don't have a presentation, but I would like to walk through elements of the noise report to highlight some of the key takeaways there. And I am happy to answer any questions about the noise report. RSG was asked by the applicant, Julian Materials, to conduct a noise assessment for the 3 quarries that are part of this application. And so that's what we did, and that's what I'd like to talk through tonight. Before we get to the noise assessment, though, I'd like to briefly talk about what a noise assessment entails, to kind of highlight the information that goes into that, and then we'll actually talk about the results of this assessment. So the process that we typically go through to conduct a noise assessment involves 5 tasks. The first is what I would call kind of a definition or inventory task, and that is where we're really talking to the project owners and project council to try and define what are the project details, where's it located, what are the noise sources, when will it operate, those types of things. Another part of that same task is to identify the applicable noise standards, which we've also done in this case. The next task is then to conduct sound level monitoring or measurements. Whenever I say monitoring, we're talking about a physical measurement with a device. So I just want to differentiate that, because you will also hear me say modeling, and when I'm talking about modeling, we're talking about a calculation. So, we conducted background sound level measurements. We often do this, but not necessarily all the time. It depends on the type of study that we're doing. And those measurements could include background sound level measurements, operational sound level measurements if the sources of interest are operating, and it can also include specific noise measurements to quantify the sound emissions from the noise sources that are proposed. So all of that was actually part of this assessment as well. The third task that we often conduct is sound propagation modeling. That's the calculation that I just referred to. That's essentially just a calculation of sound levels at specific locations where we're interested in what the potential sound levels are, the projected sound levels are at those locations. And so in this case, we did that throughout the project area, but also at discrete receptors at all area residences. This is done in a computer model, which I'll talk about in just a little bit when we get into the specifics, but it's a computer model that follows international standards. The fourth task that we usually go through in a noise assessment is mitigation development. We will work with the client to try and develop mitigation plans that will help to reduce sound levels and potential noise impacts of a project. And then the last task as part of a noise assessment is just to report out the results of that assessment. So that results in, I believe it's Exhibit I and Exhibit HH. Exhibit I is the noise report that I'll be talking through here in just a minute, and Exhibit HH is the report addendum that has some additional information in it.
Just for the purposes of the record, I think the exhibit is Exhibit J. But
Oh, excuse me, I might have read that incorrectly. Let me just check.
I could be wrong.
Oh, you're correct.
You're right. I apologize about that.
No problem.
I did not mean to confuse the
Make sure
record.
we're all looking at the same.
Did I
Yeah.
hear you say Exhibit J?
Yes. You did.
Yeah, so the noise study is Exhibit J and the addendum is Exhibit HH. So I'd like to kind of dive into the report here. Exhibit J, when I'm referring to the report, I'm talking about that. If I'm saying the addendum, we're talking about the other exhibit. And I'd like to start with the good stuff, which is in Appendix A. This is general information on acoustics that I just want to briefly cover because it's helpful to know that we're kind of all on the same page when we're talking about some of this terminology. So the first thing I just want to mention is, what is sound? Sound is fluctuations in air pressure above and below atmospheric pressure. So you could picture a sound wave moving through the atmosphere. You can't actually see it because all it is doing is vibrating air particles. And so it's compressing those air particles and moving away. Those air particles result in pressure that we can actually measure. That air pressure can be measured in pascals, and so the human ear hears from 20 micropascals up to 20 million micropascals. I don't want to get into the weeds, but the reason that I mention that is we're not going to be talking about pascals tonight. We're going to be talking about decibels or sound level, sound pressure level. We take that large range of from 20 up to 20 million, and it gets compressed down using a logarithmic function from 0 to around 120 decibels. So that's what we'll be talking about tonight. I just want to note, though, that it is a logarithmic function, and when we're talking about sound pressure level, we're using the unit decibels. So the difficult part is, well, what's a decibel mean to me? And in Appendix A, there is a figure on page 34, figure 11, and you can find a variety of sound sources there and their associated sound pressure levels. In that figure, you're welcome to look at it. I just want to highlight a few sources. The first that I often like to reference is conversational speech. So this would be if you're standing 3 feet away from your pal and having a conversation. Conversational speech typically happens between 55 and 65 decibels. And so that's just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind when we're talking about sound levels that we're referencing. If you're on a riding lawnmower, of course, it's going to depend on what your riding lawnmower is like and if it needs to be fixed and all that sort of thing. But if you're on a riding lawnmower, generally sound levels at your ear, if you're the operator, would probably be around 90 decibels. And then the last example I'll give is if you're standing in your kitchen, you've got the TV off, your spouse isn't talking to you, you're standing 3 feet away from your refrigerator, the sound level would be about 45 decibels. So that's just some examples of different types of sound levels that we're all familiar with. The last thing I'd like to highlight that comes from the appendix is that sound levels are constantly changing. Unless you're standing right next to a source that is a constant source, we can all recognize our experience of if we go outside, the sound level is going to go up and down. The sound level in this room is going up and down right now as I talk. And so because sound levels constantly change, we use different metrics to quantify what those sound levels are. The two primary ones that I think are most critical for us to understand are the maximum sound pressure level, or the L max. So if you can picture sound level versus time on a graph, the L max is that highest point on that graph. The other one that I want to point out is called LEQ, or the equivalent sound level, equivalent continuous sound level. For a layman's understanding of it, we can talk about it as an average sound level. It's not precisely an average, and I'm happy to answer questions about why it's not precisely an average, but we don't need to get into those weeds at this point in time. But we will talk about the LEQ. Those are the two metrics that we talk about most in the state of Vermont when we're talking about noise assessments and permitting projects. There are other metrics, statistical metrics, that we're not going to get into, but you could envision like a median sound level, the sound level that it happens 50% of the time or something like that. So those statistical metrics are also included in the report, but they're not as critical, I think, for our discussions as the LMAX and the LEQ. So with that, I'm just going to pause and take a quick breath here, and we're going to move into the actual information in the report. So I'm going to start off in Section 2. Section 2 provides project description, and I just want to highlight, I know you probably went over this at the first hearing, but I want to kind of very quickly walk through a project description in the context of the noise that's created at the site. So we've got 3 quarries that are part of this application. There's the Vermont 103 North Quarry, the Vermont 103 South Quarry, and the Chandler Road Quarry. The existing operations at each of these sites are kind of all the same in terms of their extraction. So all 3 quarries extract material, and this involves the use of excavators, loaders, dump trucks, occasional drilling and hammering, and just typical quarry sources that I just described. The differentiation here between the sites is that the Vermont 103 South Quarry also has crushing that occurs up to 4 times per year. That's per its Act 250 permit, and that crushing information is discussed in the addendum. That was not included in the report. The other differentiation here is that the Chandler Road Quarry also involves currently splitting and cutting operations, which are mostly located indoors, and then palletizing operations, so palletizing the material and then storing it on those pallets on site. So those are how those 2 quarries differ, but generally the extraction of rock and those processes are the same from site to site. So let's talk briefly about the proposed operations. At the Vermont 103 North Quarry, the plan there is to wrap up extraction and to reclaim it as a contractor yard, which would be used to store and retrieve equipment. And so we would go from all of those extraction sources to less sources, which are, for the most part, a truck picking up or delivering equipment. At the Vermont 103 South Quarry, it would generally continue the extraction as permitted. The extraction would go deeper and further south behind a berm that is part of, it's an overburden berm that's part of this proposal. And there would also be construction of a processing building for the splitting and cutting operations that are currently located at Chandler Road. Those would be moved to the South Quarry. And then for the Chandler Road Quarry, the splitting and cutting operations there would wind down and move to the South Quarry, and the extraction process would continue as it currently takes place, with the exception of, as we'll talk about in just a minute, we're proposing using barriers near the drill when there's a drill on site, and also that stone would be hauled from the South Quarry over to the Vermont 103 South Quarry to be processed in the splitting and cutting operation there. I think the interesting thing before we move into the rest of the study here is that overall the future sound levels will be reduced near all three sites as a result of the proposed project and the mitigation that we'll talk about in just a minute. So let's briefly mention the noise standards. So in your bylaws, the Chester bylaws, it sets a standard of 70 decibels during the day at the property line. There's also a nighttime standard, but this is a daytime operation, so I wasn't going to go into details on the nighttime standard. And then the Vermont 103 South Quarry and Vermont 103 North Quarry are all on a parcel that has an Act 250 permit. And so there are noise limits or regulations in that permit. But I also am not going to focus on that because we're here to talk about the Chester bylaws. So that's section 3 of the report. We're just kind of moving along. We're going to go into section 4 here, which is sound level measurements. So section 4 of the report, page 11, is where we start talking about sound level measurements. And in that section, we highlight background sound level measurements that were taken at 3 locations, 1 location per quarry site. And those 3 locations were representative of some nearby residences that near each quarry, some of the closest residences near each site. And they're referred to by the name of the quarry. So there's the North Monitor, which would be next to the Vermont 103 North Quarry, the South Monitor, and then there's the Chandler Monitor. If we turn to Figure 5, page 12, you'll see a map there of the North Quarry, or at least part of the North Quarry, and it shows where the North Monitor is located. It was in the woods, set back 184 feet from Vermont 103, which is a similar distance to other residences in the area along Vermont 103. On the next page, figure 6, at the South Monitor, we set that monitor up near the Allstone office, which is right along Vermont 103. It was set back from Vermont 103 at a distance of around 102 feet, which is a similar distance to some of the residences in the area. And then finally, the following page, page 14, figure 7, the Chandler Monitor. That monitor was set up next to Dean Brook Road. I forget how far back it was set from. It was set back 50 feet from Dean Brook Road and directly across the street from some of the closest residences there. The monitoring took place over a period of 8 days in April of 2023. Those 8 days included both weekdays and the weekend. We'll talk about the significance of that in just a second here. If you could turn to page 15, table 2. We summarize the background sound levels in a number of different ways in the report here. I'm just highlighting a few of them. But table 2 here, we compare the weekday, daytime sound pressure levels. That would be when the quarries are operating, to the weekend daytime sound pressure levels. So it's the same time frame in terms of time of day, but it would be what we would consider a background sound level measurement with the quarry not operating. And so in this table here, what you'll see is that there is little difference between the average sound levels, or the maximum sound levels for that matter, between the North Quarry and the South Quarry. And the reason for that is that the sound levels during the day at those sites are driven by the traffic on Vermont 103. It's all pass-by vehicles, so trucks and cars and whatever else is on the roadway going by. That's what's driving the background sound levels and the sound levels during the weekdays at those locations. Those are the closest residences to those two quarries. The Chandler Road Quarry is a little bit different. The Chandler Road Quarry, the maximum sound levels between the weekdays and the weekends are similar. So they rise to the same levels, and that's because there's lots of things in our environment that create maximum sound levels. But the average sound levels are clearly different. So the daytime sound levels at Chandler Road on average during the weekday is 48 decibels, and on the weekend is 38 decibels. So there is a 10 decibel difference there between the average operational sound levels out near those residences and the average sound level on the weekend during background sound levels. I just want to point out briefly, we also show sound levels versus time. So on page 16 in figure 8 and the following page in figure 9, those are the sound levels versus time in those graphs. And what you can see there, we've labeled the weekdays and the weekends, and in both the average and the maximum sound levels, you see little difference or little change in the sound levels. It's the same information that is kind of conveyed in table 2, but you can visually see it from day to day there, that the sound levels are not really different on the weekend than they are during the weekdays. In contrast, in figure 10 on page 18, we can see there, like I mentioned already, that the maximum sound levels in the vicinity of the Chandler Road Quarry are similar on the weekend as they are during the weekday, but clearly the average sound levels, which are represented by the gray line in the graph, the average sound levels are lower during the weekend than they are during the weekday. So that kind of covers the existing environment in the vicinity of the 3 quarries. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the sound propagation modeling, which is in section 5. As I alluded to in my introduction, the sound propagation modeling is conducted following an international standard. That international standard is called ISO 9613-2. It's the same standard that all professionals in this industry use for calculating sound propagation outdoors. When I say industry, I'm talking about noise control engineering and acoustics, not the aggregate industry. That methodology has been used in other cases before local Vermont boards, the district commission, and the environmental court. So it's a reliable standard for making these types of calculations. It's a 3-dimensional model. It takes into account source emissions and locations. It takes into account receiver locations. It takes into account the terrain of the area and how that terrain may change over time. And it also takes into account a variety of attenuating factors that affect propagation. And while much of the area around the sites is forested, there's no attenuation due to forest taken into account in the model that is provided in the report.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
All of these models that we're about to discuss are based on the prior testing you did, correct?
Yes, so the input into the models is based off of prior sound level measurements of sources. So we modeled the sound levels at 122 nearby residences next to all 3 quarry sites and all along the project property lines. What you'll find in the appendices of the report are the sound levels for every scenario that I'm about to talk about at all of those residences, but you'll also find maps that show sound level ISO lines, which are like a contour map, except those contours represent sound levels. And so anywhere along any of the property lines, you can look to see what the sound level is along that property line in those maps. You don't necessarily have to do that. You're welcome to do that. We summarize the results of the property line in the report. So for the north monitor on, well, actually, before I get there, I just want to highlight, oh, sure, sorry.
Yeah, is there a location specifically in here that indicates the properties at which these were done? I'm sorry, and I just didn't catch the page number.
Yes, sorry. So Appendix C of the report provides the model results at every receptor identified by the address of the receptor.
Thank you.
There's also in, I think, Appendix D, there are maps of the model results for each quarry site for all the scenarios. So you can look at the colored lines on those maps and see what the sound level is anywhere on the map.
Could you tell us page numbers, please, when you do
Yes, so Appendix C is on starts on page 57, and Appendix D starts on page 62. So we modeled a total of 17 scenarios. There are 15 in the noise report and 2 more in the addendum. Of those scenarios, 10 of them were existing scenarios and 7 of them were proposed scenarios. And we go into detail in the report in table 4 and 5, which starts on page 22, that talks about what the scenario is, the North Quarry, the South Quarry, Chandler Quarry. The terrain stage, are we talking about existing terrain or are we talking about future terrain? And then it identifies the sources that are modeled. It identifies the sources that are included in each one of those modeling scenarios. Now, it might seem excessive to have 17 modeled scenarios, but what we're trying to, first of all, it's 3 quarries, so we're modeling different scenarios for each one. But we're modeling the regular operations so we can get a sense of what the regular operations do. And then we're modeling separate scenarios for those sources that operate only on occasion, like the rock drill or the rock hammer or the crushing operation. So that's how we get, and we're modeling existing and future terrain. So that's how we get up to that many phases, or that many scenarios, excuse me. But what I'd like to highlight here is on page 24, we have the results for the Vermont 103 North Quarry. And in those results, in the middle of the page, we can talk about the paragraph. All we're doing here is verbally describing what's occurring in the maps in the back. We can see that the sound levels exceed 70 decibels at the property line, but only along Vermont 103 and the northeast corner of the property. And these are areas where the sound levels already exceed 70 decibels on a regular basis due to vehicle pass-bys on Vermont 103. So even if the quarry's not there, the sound levels are going to exceed 70 decibels along those property lines.
But the hertz ratings between the vehicles and the equipment are going to be very, very markedly different, aren't they?
Well, you have trucks as part of the proposed operation, and you have trucks driving by in Vermont 103 all the time.
Yeah, but
in
the
addition,
sound of a car on 103 is going to be very much lower hertz than an operational of a throttled up hammer or something, correct? By thousands, probably.
You're correct that they would be different. The accurate description would be that a car driving by would result in higher frequency sound than a truck driving by, or the sound level of the engine of equipment at an excavator.
All right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
By lower and higher in frequency does not mean louder or quieter. It just means low frequency sound versus high frequency sound.
It's perceptual, too.
Yeah, so you could think of it as a piccolo versus a bass guitar.
Thank you.
That's kind of the range that we're talking about. It's a characteristic of the sound. So the same is the case for future scenarios. Sound level exceeds 70 decibels, but it will exceed it less often because it will be when a truck is accessing the site to drop off equipment or pick equipment up. Of course, if traffic...
Excuse me.
Sure.
Young lady has a question.
Leslie Thorson, and I just would like to know, what's your definition of exceeding 70? What's your decibel? If you were measuring decibels, you're saying exceeding 70, what would your actual number be?
So I'm happy to answer the question, but I'm actually almost done walking through the report, and I'm just wondering from a procedural standpoint if I could get through the report and then answer any questions at all about the report. Does that work for the board?
He said he's happy to answer the question, but he'd rather finish the report and then answer your question, if that's okay. The young lady said
I will
it's
make
okay.
sure to come back to that.
Yes. Your question's been noted.
So on page 26, we again kind of summarize what is in the maps in the back. And on page 20, this is the results for the South Quarry. And the sound levels do not exceed 70 decibels at the property line, except when a vehicle is driving over the property line to access the site. This would be no different than any type of development in town. If you're going to have a truck drive over the property line, you're going to exceed 70 decibels at the property line when a truck is driving over the property line. There's no way around that. And I am not an attorney, and I'm not going to try and interpret law, but there is environmental court precedent that speaks to trucks causing exceedances of sound levels at a property line to access the site, because if you didn't allow that, you couldn't develop anything in the state. And then the last one that I want to point out is the Chandler Road Quarry on page 28. The paragraph at the bottom, it talks about what I'm about to summarize here, and that is that sound levels exceed 70 decibels at the property line for both existing and future operations at the Chandler Road Quarry. This is, the reason for this would be related to the pre-existing non-conforming use at the site. That is that you have an access road that runs adjacent to the property line to the site. It's a very thin strip of land to get into the site, and it runs right along the property line. So anytime a truck is accessing the site there, the sound levels all along that property line would be 70 for the short duration that the truck is passing by. In addition, the extraction limits in the quarry abut the property line. It goes right up to the property line in some areas. And so sound levels in excess of 70 decibels occur in those areas whenever you're working that close to the property line in the extraction area. For the most part, though, sound levels in excess of 70 around the Chandler Road Quarry are occurring in forested areas. They're not right at residential areas. So the last section to talk about here is mitigation, and then I'm happy to answer questions. Mitigation is discussed in section 6 of the report on page 29. I hadn't planned to cover all of the mitigation that's here, but I'm happy to if people have questions about it. But I did want to highlight a few things here. One is that we've recommended that simultaneous drilling and hammering be prohibited and not take place at any of the sites. So if a drill is operating, you can't be operating a rock hammer, or if a rock hammer is operating, you can't be operating a rock drill. And the same thing goes for the Vermont 103, the South Quarry, except that that's the location where a crushing operation is allowed to occur out of 4 weeks of the year. In that case, we've said, don't operate the drill at the same time that you're operating the crusher or the rock hammer. So those three sources should not operate simultaneously. Whether it's two sources or three sources, only one of those is allowed to operate at a given time. We've also recommended for the Chandler Road site that a portable drill barrier be used near the rock drill when that's occurring at the Chandler Road Quarry. And we talk about that in more specifics in the report here, but the purpose of that is to help mitigate or reduce sound levels as it travels to the, let me make sure I get my directions right here, to the west. So we're trying to reduce sound levels at the closest residences to the northwest there when drilling is occurring. And then lastly, the project plans it also involve constructing an overburden storage berm at the Vermont 103 South Quarry site, and that will help attenuate sound from propagating eastward as that extraction process moves southward. There are other mitigation measures, as I mentioned, that I'm happy to talk through, but the primary takeaway from the noise assessment is that the proposed changes in operations at each of the quarries, including the mitigation that we just discussed, ends up resulting in sound levels around each of the 3 quarries and the potential for noise impacts being reduced at all 3 sites. And that concludes my direct testimony. Oh, sorry. Jeremy just asked me to go over the addendum real quick. The addendum is very much similar to the noise report. I don't plan to go into detail here, but there's 2 reasons here for the addendum, and that is that there are 2 modeling scenarios for crushing that was not included in the original report. Again, the crushing would be for up to 4 weeks per year at the South Quarry, so we've provided those model results there, and it's the same conclusions that are included in the noise report. And there is a clarification when we talk about rock hammering in the report. We talk about it occurring up to 2 days per month, I believe. And through clarification, it's my understanding that the rock hammering actually occurs up to 2 days per week. So we wanted to be clear that that was a correction that needs to be made from the report. It's made in the addendum. It doesn't affect the sound level results that we're talking about here, but we did want to clarify that.
Thank you, Eddie.
I have a question for you.
I have questions for Mr. Duncan when it's my turn.
Since your modeling is based on the study that you already did, which we've agreed on, right? Something that would help me have a better ability to understand the effect that all this sound has. And you seem like science is your thing. I can see that about you. So I'm not casting any aspersions here. I'm looking at this, trying to understand my tractor has this thing called the throttle on it. And my wife's a lot happier when I pull it down halfway when I'm driving past the porch. I would love to know that the company that you work for that was hired by them to do this study, and you knew when they knew when you were going to be there. How do we know, and I'm not casting aspersions, how do we know that the numbers we're seeing and the numbers that you were recording were at operational velocity?
Yeah, that's a great question. If I had questions about the numbers that we were recording when we were actually monitoring noise sources, those would have come up because we generally know what the sound levels from those sources should be. It's within a range. We've got data, like for example, for a rock drill, we have data on tons of rock drills. So the question is, does this data align with the rest of the rock drills that we know of, or is there something funky about this rock drill and they modified it to make it quieter? And so if a question like that occurs, then we would reach back out to the operator to say, what's going on here? Is there something, this is different than what we've monitored before. Is it real? Is it not? Is it not? Maybe we need to go back out and monitor again. The data that's used in this report is vetted data that's been used in other applications. Some of it's been monitored here, but it aligns with the rest of the data that we're seeing for those types of sources.
I have some questions.
And I'm happy to finish answering the board's question, but I just want to note there was one question prior to the board, and I don't know if you want me to answer that now or later.
Leslie, would you like to ask your question again? Please.
Hi, I'm Leslie Thorson. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you. Said on page 24 and on page 26 that the sound exceeded 70 decibels, and I want to know what that actual measurement is by number.
Sorry, Leslie, we can't hear you. That whatever Leslie said is not going to be in the record because it didn't show up on the Zoom record. So it has to be, if you could repeat it louder.
Okay, I wanted to know on page 24 and on page 26 of this report that the sound exceeded 70 decibels, and I wanted to know what the actual decibel level was that exceeded 70.
Yeah, so the sound level exceeds 70 decibels at a variety of locations in the report, both in the monitoring results and the modeling results. So it is not a single number that I can provide. If you look in Appendix D, you can see there the sound level of 70 and how far over it crosses the property line in all of those maps, but it's different for every scenario. So I can't give a specific number for how much over 70. What I can do is, if we look to the background sound level, for 4 specific numbers, if we look to the background sound level information, which is on page 16, 17, and 18, these were monitors that the North monitor and the Chandler Road, or the Chandler monitor, were not placed directly on the property line. They were placed in the property a little bit. But we can see here that on page 16, figure 8, that the sound levels at a setback of 180 feet are regularly exceed 70 decibels on an LMAX basis all day long. So those levels range anywhere from 70 up to 85, and those are due to vehicle pass-bys on Vermont 103. It's a similar story for the South monitor. You can see there on figure 9, page 17, that those existing sound levels down in that area are already above 70 decibels, between 70 and 85 on a regular basis throughout the day. And then finally, at the Chandler monitor, again, there's not a difference in the LMAX values between the weekday and the weekend, but we can see that the maximum sound levels at the Chandler monitor were generally between 60 and 70 decibels, and in some cases lower than that at different times of the day. But there are sound levels that are occurring between 60 and 70 decibels, a few instances as high as 80 decibels in the middle of the day.
And to what do you attribute that?
This could be a variety of things. So you might have a vehicle pass by on the nearby road. It's not a well-traveled road, but a vehicle pass by could cause a sound level to spike up. You could have a bird that decides to land in the tree nearby and chirp for 5 or 10 minutes, and that bird could cause sound levels 65 decibels or more. There's anything can happen that can cause these types of sound levels. It's not uncommon for maximum sound levels to exceed 60, 65, 70 in the environment in Vermont.
We have a question from a person in the back.
Priscilla Sam Melanson. I live right across from that quarry. Have you heard any of the videos that we have recorded of those sounds? I'm very, very curious as to whether that equipment, which they knew you were coming to do this, and again, it's nothing on you, but they knew you were coming to do this, they could have turned their equipment down during these tests. Those sound levels from my property are not caused by traffic.
I have not heard the videos that are being referenced. Just to comment on the turning down, and there was also a question by Board Member McDonald. Most of this equipment, it's not like it has a volume control that you can turn down. So when you've got a rock hammer and it's hitting a rock, it's hitting a rock. Like, you can't make it a quieter, like metal versus rock is not going to be quieter. It's the same force that hammer is producing every single time when you hit the rock. So that's not going to be that different. The cutting and splitting operations are also fixed. They have to operate at the power in order to produce product, and they were producing product while we were there measuring at the site. And so if you were to turn it down, I don't even think that's possible. The breakers would not break the rock because it needs that power to break the rock. So it's not like it's just a speaker with a volume control that you can turn up or down. You know, it may be different in like the case of like, are you revving an engine or not? That's a little bit different. But a lot of the mechanics that cause these maximum sound levels are metal against rock and things of that nature. And that is, you know, you can't turn that down.
Mr. Chairman, I have questions whenever there's time.
Yes, Jim.
Is this a good time?
Yes.
Well, thank you. Mr. Duncan, how are you this evening?
Very good. Nice to see you, Mr. Dumont, or Attorney Dumont.
I want to spend some time getting into the record what you know, but you didn't tell the board member when he asked you about the different frequencies. Do you remember, I couldn't tell who on the Zoom, but you had a question about the different frequencies of existing noise as compared to the modeled noise. Do you remember that question?
I do remember the question about the different characteristics of sources. And
Right, so I want to pursue that with you. First of all the modeling that you did was A-weighted, correct?
That's incorrect. The model results are A-weighted, but the sound levels that we are actually modeling are unweighted sound levels.
Right. The results are A-weighted, correct?
That's correct. They're using the same weighting that we would use for the noise standard.
Right. Now, does the noise standard in Chester say to use A weighting?
It does not, but it is understood in environmental acoustics to use A-weighted.
So that's your interpretation that it says A-weighted, correct?
It's my interpretation as a noise control engineer that does environmental acoustics across the country and interprets noise standards all the time. Yes.
Now, I'd like you to explain to the board what A-weighting means.
A-weighting is, if you were talking about decibels, you'll see it denoted as dBA if it's being used correctly. A-weighting is a weighting network that is applied to frequencies that describes how that quantifies how the human ear perceives loudness. So in environmental acoustics, we use A-weighting because that is how we perceive relative loudness of sources. And so you can use other weightings, but it's not how the human ear perceives loudness, which is typically what we're concerned about in environmental acoustics, is how people perceive things to be loud or not loud.
But on that point, Mr. Duncan, let's go back to the example you gave about the difference between a piccolo and a bass. Do you remember what you said?
I didn't, someone coughed and I didn't hear what you said there.
You gave the example of the difference between the noise from a piccolo and the noise from a bass guitar, correct?
Yes, I don't know if I said noise, but the sound of a piccolo versus the sound of a guitar.
Right, so the loudness by itself doesn't tell you how it will be perceived by an individual human, because the frequencies can be very different, correct?
That's incorrect.
So let me delve into this a little bit further. You mentioned the ISO 9000 standard, correct?
9613-2, yes.
9613, and that is based upon the ANSI standard, correct?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Tell us what the ANSI standard is that you use in your daily work as a noise acoustic engineer, the ANSI standard.
Yeah, I'm not sure what standard you're referring to. I use ISO 9613-2 to calculate sound levels outdoors.
What is the American National Standards Institute?
It is essentially a clearinghouse for standards and standard development in the United States. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of standards for a variety of industries, including acoustics.
And there's an ANSI standard specifically for acoustic modeling, correct? Am I right?
I believe that there may be. It's not the standard that we're using here.
And does the American National Standards Institute say that A-weighted modeling is not useful to determine the answer to the question the board member asked you? Because masking, which is the scientific term for what you're describing, the masking of new sound by existing sound cannot be determined using A-weighted data?
The question is large and ambiguous. I don't know that I can answer it.
What does the American National Standards Institute state is the validity of using A-weighted data to determine masking?
There are, as I mentioned, thousands of documents by the American National Standards Institute, so I'm not going to presume to know what document you are talking about.
So if your answer is you don't know the answer to the question, is that right?
That's not what I said. If you want me to clarify, I'm going to say that I don't understand the question.
Okay. Tell us what the American National Standard Institute standards for acoustic modeling say about whether it's valid to use A-weighted data to determine if masking will occur.
I'm not familiar with the specifics references that you are referring to.
So if our expert testifies that about what the ANSI standard says about masking, you're not going to disagree with that because you don't understand the answer or you don't understand the question?
Well, it's likely the case that if you have an expert about to testify on it and it's something that I'm not aware of, I will become aware of it. So I'm not going to say if I will agree or disagree on it. I would want to review the information.
So let's go back to the example you gave about the piccolo and the bass. If you have piccolo music that's a piccolo noise that's loud and persistent and it's 70 decibels, does that mean that someone living in a home is not going to be bothered by bass notes that are in addition to the piccolo, even though the piccolo has a louder sound pressure level or is a louder decibel level?
Sorry, could you be more specific about 70 decibels from the piccolo?
Yes, suppose the L-max for the piccolo is 70 decibels at my home.
Yes.
And that's what I'm used to, 70 decibels of piccolo music. And you're proposing, or you're supporting a project that will introduce 70 decibels of bass music, a bass guitar, or drums. Is it your testimony that the piccolo music will mask or cover up the new sound so that I won't be disturbed by it?
No, I haven't testified about masking in piccolos or bass, so I haven't done that type of analysis, so I can't answer your question.
So what is the frequency? The scientific term I know is frequency. What are the characteristics of the existing truck noise on Route 103 as compared to the frequency of the noise that will occur from use of a hydraulic hammer? How do those frequencies compare?
Yeah, so vehicle pass-bys on Vermont 103 will vary from vehicle to vehicle, but the frequency content of a truck, which is what you're referencing, that passes by on Vermont 103 will be made up of both low-frequency and high-frequency sound. The high-frequency sound will come primarily from tire noise. It's an interaction of the tires with the roadway, and the low-frequency sound, some of that will also come from the exhaust stack, and the low-frequency sound would come primarily from the engine or the exhaust stack of the truck. Those frequencies, both high and low, are frequencies that occur with the quarry operations as well, because they also involve internal combustion engines that produce both low frequency and high frequency. And you have the sound level of metal hitting rock, which is primarily high frequency sound. So the range of sound levels that you see on Vermont 103 also, or excuse me, of frequencies that you see from Vermont 103 are also the range of frequencies that are represented from the quarry.
My question is about the hydraulic hammer. What will be the frequency or the range of frequencies of noise from the hydraulic hammer?
I apologize. I may have said rock drill, but I was thinking rock hammer. So rock hammer is the same as the rock drill in terms of it is metal on rock. It produces a high frequency sound from that source, and then you would have the engine noise that would produce mid to low frequency sounds. The primary sound that you hear though from a rock hammer is the metal on the rock, which is high frequency.
If you could turn to your Exhibit J, sound emission data, page 21. You there?
Page 21, I'm there.
Does this have the sound power levels for a rock hammer?
Yes, on page 21, table 3, the very first line is rock hammer, and it provides the sound power levels for those sources. I did not explain the difference between power levels and pressure levels. I'm happy to do that as to not confuse anyone, but these are the sound power levels of the rock hammer.
And these are broken out by frequencies?
They are. We present the power levels from 31.5 hertz up to 8,000 hertz, and we also provide the total sound level, A-weighted sound power level.
For reasons we've started to discuss, I'm not so much interested in the A weighting. I'm interested in the individual frequency bands. So tell us, starting with the rock hammer at 31.5 hertz. Is 31.5 as high frequency as you've just testified?
No.
It's extremely low frequency, isn't it?
I don't know that I would call it extremely low, but I would put it as low frequency.
How about very low?
It's a qualitative description. I will put it in the category of low frequency.
What's the lowest frequency a normal human ear can hear?
20 hertz.
So this is just 11.5 hertz above the lowest frequency that a normal human ear can hear, correct?
Yes.
And you're not willing to say that's very low frequency?
Well, sound can occur below the level at which you can hear, so I would say 1 hertz is very low frequency.
I see.
I'll get
Okay.
back to you, but 31.5 hertz, it is classified as low frequency noise. I'm not aware of any standard that defines it as very low or extremely low.
Well, you're not testifying in front of a board of scientists. These are lay people. We're interested in what the human ear can hear, not other noises. You understand that?
I do. Sometimes people are interested in what's happening below 20 hertz, so I appreciate the clarification.
Yeah, you're very welcome. What about 100? What about 63 hertz? Is that high frequency as you've testified you expect from a rock hammer?
No, 63 hertz would be classified as low frequency.
And what about 123 hertz? Is that low frequency as you testified?
The column there, I believe,
Is that high frequency, excuse me, as you testified?
that column, I believe there is labeled 125 hertz, and that would be on the border between low and high frequency, or low and mid frequency, but would generally be classified as low frequency.
Thank you. And what about 250 hertz? Is that high frequency as you testified?
No, that would be classified as mid frequency.
And what about 500 hertz? Is that high frequency?
No, that would be classified as mid frequency.
Okay. What about 1,000 hertz? Is that high frequency?
That would be on the border of mid to high frequency.
What about 2,000 hertz?
That would be considered high frequency.
What is the highest frequency that a normal human ear can hear?
20 kilohertz. Or
Which is
20,000 hertz.
1,000 hertz.
20,000 hertz.
20,000 hertz. Thank you. So on your table 3, this shows sound power levels. Now, why don't you explain the relationship between sound power levels and decibels?
Sure. So sound power levels are what we use as input into the model, and the model predicts sound pressure levels. And the reason for that is that every source has an inherent amount of power it's outputting, but the actual pressure that we're measuring or that we hear is influenced by the environment. And so these sound powers are not being influenced by the environment. That rock hammer would be 126 decibels no matter where you took it. To kind of help tie that up if it's confusing for anyone, a 60-watt light bulb is a 60-watt light bulb no matter where you take it. That's the power of the light bulb. But that 60-watt light bulb may look dimmer or brighter in a different room, depending on the environmental conditions of that room, the paint and things of that nature. So the 60 watts for a light bulb is like the sound power of a source, and the brightness of that source, that light bulb in a different room is like the sound pressure level.
I have a very important question that ties in with this for you.
Go ahead.
So when you're saying, let's just look at the 8,000 hertz and 109 decibels, okay, for the rock hammer, is that the sound of the rock hammer running, or is that the sound of the rock hammer hitting rock?
These are the maximum sound levels that occur from these sources, and so it's whatever was occurring when that maximum sound level occurred. It would be the actual bit hitting the rock. That being said, the engine is still running in the background. That's part of the source.
And that's at the source.
Yeah, the sound power levels, you could say, are at the source. If you were within a foot of it, it would be on the order of 5 to 6 decibels, more like 10 decibels less than what's here.
So, before I leave the subject, can you put in your own words how a layperson should understand the effect of background or pre-existing noise of run frequency affects how humans react to new noise of a substantially different frequency?
Could you repeat that question, please?
Yes, as an expert, can you explain to us lay people how background noise of a certain frequency affects humans' perceptions and reaction to added noise of a substantially different frequency?
Attorney Dumont, this may be the most difficult question that you've ever asked me. Explaining masking in lay terms is quite complicated. It is a very difficult question to answer. And the reason for that is there are multiple different mechanisms that can cause masking. I will generalize, but this is not a complete answer of how masking works. So, generally speaking, sound levels of similar frequencies can mask sound levels of similar frequencies. So a high frequency sound source typically does not mask a low frequency sound source. There are certainly exceptions to that are more complicated than I think I can explain in layman's terms at this point in time, and would be happy to give it further thought and explain it more clearly. But there are instances where sounds of different frequencies can mask sounds that are not in that same frequency band.
Is there anything in your report, Exhibit J and Exhibit HH, that this board can rely upon in determining whether or not the existing sound levels will mask the projected sound levels?
The board can make a layman's comparison of the existing sound levels that occur at the site and the projected sound levels that occur at the site. That's why we provide both background and the model results. Those sound levels can be compared, and you can get a sense of whether or not those sound levels occur at the site currently. But this is not a study that is analyzing masking directly. Masking is not the local standard, so we don't provide any conclusions or anything like that in the report.
Can you point me and the board to where you show the existing frequencies, the frequencies of the existing noise, say at the LeClaire's house or at the Thorson Kilgus house?
I apologize if your last question asked about specific frequencies. I don't know that I answered that question if that was the case. We provide the overall sound level. We do not provide the modeled frequencies at any specific location or the monitored frequencies at any specific location. Although that information certainly went into the monitoring and the modeling, it's part of the analysis. That's not what is reported here. We're reporting on the local noise standard.
So the answer to my question is there is nothing in Exhibit J and nothing in Exhibit HH that would allow this board to determine whether the existing levels of noise will mask what your client proposes. Am I correct?
That's correct. We did not do a masking analysis.
Thank you. Now let's talk about the term existing. You and I have been using it in the last few minutes, and it's also in many places in your report. You did not, in your study, and you did not in your reports, address the levels and frequency of noise from operations that were permitted by the 2005 Act 250 permit and permitted by the 2003 zoning permit, did you?
Could you repeat the question?
Yes. Your studies and your reports, which are Exhibits J and HH, did not address the loudness or the frequency of the noise caused by the operations that were permitted by the Act 250 permit in 2005 and permitted by the conditional use permit in 2003, did they?
Yeah, Attorney Dumont, I'm certainly not trying to be difficult. I always enjoy answering your questions. I just want to be clear about what you're talking about when you use the word frequency, because even as it's used in the report, it has multiple meanings.
Good point. Thank you. So I'll start over. Exhibits J and HH do not address the loudness or the frequency distribution of noise caused by the operations that were legally permitted by the Act 250 permit in 2005 and legally permitted by the zoning permit in 2003. Am I correct?
No, you're not. It does address the loudness. That's represented throughout the entire report. That is the sound levels that occur, both through modeling and through monitoring. And then in terms of the frequency distribution, just to clarify the record, because we just got done talking about frequency, I believe you are talking about the amount of time a sound level occurs. You're not talking about low frequency, mid frequency, or high frequency sounds. Could you just clarify that? I know I'm not the one asking the questions, but.
What I'm asking is, didn't you use the existing noise levels in 2023 from the existing operations, which includes operations that are not lawful under the Act 250 permit and are not lawful under the conditional use permit? Am I correct?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think you've lost me. I didn't do anything in 2003 other than graduate from college. So I just don't know what you're referring to.
Right. So have you read the decision by the Natural Resources Board's coordinator distinguishing between the operations that were lawful under the Act 250 permit and the operations that are not lawful under the Act 250 permit but are ongoing in 2023? Have you read that?
I believe that I read that. I did not refresh my memory on that document prior to this local hearing tonight, so I don't know that I could speak to it directly.
So you don't know which of the noises you monitored and which of the noises you modeled are lawful noises. You're just treating them, if they exist right now, they're lawful. That's what you've done, correct?
I know that I can't object to the question, but I'm going to say that it requires a legal conclusion, and I'm not comfortable making that.
So nobody, say from Paul Franklin Collins or from Trudell Consulting Engineers said, here are the noise sources that we want you to study because these were the ones that were permitted under the zoning permit and under the Act 250 permit. You never had that conversation, did you?
This is Attorney Eaton from Paul Franklin Collins. I would just make an objection to the question that it might be seeking attorney-client privileged information, and to the extent that it is, I would object, but to the extent it's not, I'll have him answer.
I do not recall whether or not I had a conversation like you are describing or suggesting. I had conversations, I do recall, with the applicant about what the proposed operations are and what operations are occurring there today.
So if part of the duties of this board is to determine what operations should be allowed that are not allowed under existing permits, how does your Exhibit J and your Exhibit HH assist the board in doing that?
As I've stated previously, my answer to this is that the Chester bylaws are clearly stated in the report, and we evaluate the Chester bylaws, or we evaluate sound levels so that the board can compare the sound levels that we're evaluating with the Chester bylaws.
Okay, on that question, why don't we turn to page 10 of your report, which is Exhibit J. I'm sorry, it's I think it's page 10.
I'm there.
You have 4 bullet points. Are you on that page?
Yes, I am.
Section 3.3. First bullet point, in section 3.3, you summarize what your study assesses, correct?
I'm sorry, you broke up there. Could you repeat it?
Yes, in section 3.3, you summarize the 4 areas that you studied.
In section 3.3, we list the 4 criteria that we are using in the assessment.
Let's read it. It says, for this study, we assess noise from the project by, and then the first bullet point, comparing projected sound levels from the proposed contractor yard with projected historical extraction operations at the Vermont 103 North Quarry. Did I read that correctly?
That's correct.
When you say historical, you mean existing in 2023, to be more accurate, correct?
Yes, my understanding, when I say historical, is what is existing there, and my understanding from the client has been occurring there.
Second bullet point, applying the existing permit condition at the Vermont 103 South Quarry. Did I read that correctly?
That's correct.
The third bullet point, comparing projected sound levels from the proposed future operations at the Chandler Road Quarry with the existing operations at Chandler Road Quarry, correct?
That's correct.
And then the fourth bullet point, comparing projected sound levels from the proposed operations for all quarries to the 70 dBA property line limit of the Chester Development Bylaws. Did I read that correctly?
I believe so.
Okay, so does the Chester Development Bylaws state that noise in excess of 70 decibels at the property line is allowed from a new use if there's already 70 decibels of noise from another use? Is that your understanding of what it says?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes, is it your understanding of the bylaws that they allow conditional use approval of noise in excess of 70 decibels off the property line from a proposed new use if there is existing noise at the property line that's already 70 decibels?
I believe it calls for a legal conclusion. So I would be hesitant to answer that question.
Well, you told us you work in this area day in and day out, Act 250 and zoning. Do you have any opinion as to whether this bylaw says it's okay to exceed 70 decibels if some other source is already exceeding 70 decibels, no matter what the frequency is of the existing source?
Yeah, in the section of the bylaws that I have here accessible to me in the report, I don't see the word okay anywhere in there. So I would say no, it doesn't say what you are saying.
And I want to talk to you a little bit more about this. Let's see here. It's section 4.9, performance standards, 4.9A, and it says, noise shall not exceed 70 decibels during the day between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. That's your understanding of it, correct?
Yes, that's the same.
It doesn't have a clause that says, unless there is some noise source in the area that already exceeds 70 decibels. It doesn't say that, does it?
I apologize, Attorney Dumont. There may be a delay in the Wi-Fi signal here or something, but I was still answering your previous question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What I was just saying that what you read from the bylaws is the same language that we include in the noise assessment.
But your noise assessment actually assumed, didn't it, that noise can exceed 70 decibels during the day if there is pre-existing noise that exceeds 70 decibels, no matter what its frequency is. Your assessment assumed that, didn't it?
I don't assume that, no. That's drawing a legal conclusion. What the assessment does is exactly what we said that it does. It compares the existing sound levels, it compares the proposed sound levels to the Chester bylaws, which is 70 decibels during the day. And so that's what it does.
But you didn't provide the frequency distribution of the background noise as compared to the new noise, did you?
I mean, we provide the sound levels throughout the entire monitoring period. So technically, yes, the frequency distribution of the existing sound levels are there, both for operations and background. So I'm not quite sure I understand your question.
You provided a weighted background noise, correct?
Yes, although by asking that question, it leads me to think I did not understand what you meant by frequency distribution in your last question.
Right. So let's talk about the other part of 4.9A. The bullet point on page 10 says, comparing projected sound levels from the proposed future operations for all quarries to the 70 dBA property line limit of the Chester development bylaws. You didn't mention the sentence in 4.9A that says, noise levels or frequencies which are not customary in the district or neighborhood, or which represent a repeated disturbance to others, shall not be permitted. Do Exhibit J and Exhibit HH address that sentence which I just read?
Yes, so that sentence you just read is included in Exhibit J, and it does address it.
Using A-weighted data, correct?
No. It's kind of inherent. I don't mean any insult, but it's kind of a no-brainer I mean, the idea here is noise levels or frequencies that are not customary in the district or neighborhood. There are 3 quarries there today. There are 3 quarries in the future. The sources are essentially the same, so the frequencies are the same. So there's no additional analysis needed to say what is there, what exists at the site, and what is proposed are different or the same.
So that gets back to our previous questioning, which is you assume that what's going on in 2023, what's there right now with the 3 quarries, is legal and permitted, don't you?
I don't assume whether something is legal or not legal. I'm doing a noise assessment here. I will leave the legal determination to the board, to you, to the attorneys to figure out what's legal and not legal going on today.
Is it your understanding of noise ordinances that you should consider as a background noise which is currently unlawful in that neighborhood?
Again, it requires a legal determination. So I will quantify sound levels. If someone wants me to quantify something that they tell me is legal or not legal, I will quantify sound levels, which is what's done in this report. I don't have any clarification about what is legal or not legal there today, so I can't speak specific to this project. But as a noise control engineer, if you want me to do a measurement, I will go take a measurement and tell you what the sound level is.
Great, thank you. That's all I have.
Bob?
For questions. Go ahead.
My head's ready to explode. We have what I think is a fairly simple standard. And both your report and your discussion with Attorney Dumont was anything but. So let me see if I can simplify this so at least I can understand it. First, our standard calls for measurement of decibels at the property line, and that's the applicant's property line. Okay? Why then do we go into, for example, on page 27 and 28, these lengthy analyses of LMAX at various addresses?
That's a very good question. So this is a noise assessment that is not necessarily solely for this local proceeding. So that is information that will be pertinent or likely pertinent to an Act 250 process down the road. So the study covers both processes.
Okay, fair enough. Page 21. The overall sound power level, and this is for each activity piece of equipment, these are source sound levels.
These are source sound power levels, yes.
Okay. And some of these are measured. Some of these I see you've taken from your library. What is NCH RP 2549?
That's a good question. So all of this data comes from measurements originally in one form or another. NCHRP 2549 stands for National, I believe I'm going to get this correct, National Cooperative, oh, thank you. National Cooperative Highway Research Program. This is a research project for essentially the FHWA to quantify the sound emissions from common construction equipment. And so we will often use for different pieces of equipment data from NCHRP 2549 because it samples, if you've got a dozer, it's sampling like 50 dozers or something like that.
Okay. Now, let's go for a sec to page 16. And also 17 and 18. But I think the graph on 16 is prettier. What's the green?
Sorry, you said page 16?
Yeah, what's the green?
The green is the difference between the L90 and the LEQ. So the green line is the L90. The L90 is a statistical metric. That is the sound level that is exceeded 90% of the time.
Okay.
So that very bottom of that green area, 10% of the sound levels that we measured would be below that line.
Okay. Our standard doesn't talk about 90% of the time. Our standard says shall not exceed.
That's correct. Your standard, I would say, probably speaks to an Lmax metric. I would say your standard doesn't specify a metric. It says shall not exceed. Oftentimes, that is referred to as an Lmax metric, but not in all jurisdictions. So I don't want to presume to know what you're going for, but we took the conservative approach and said, let's look at the Lmax and compare that to the 70 decibels. In this graph, that Lmax is the orange line at the top.
Okay. Okay. So let's talk about the rock hammer. We've had a lot, we've been talking about rock hammers. What's the decibel level at the nearest property line for each of your quarries for the rock hammer? Where are you in the report so we can follow?
Yeah, I'm still finding it, so.
Okay.
Yeah. So for the South Quarry, figure 32, page 67, is the scenario that looks at the sound levels, including the hammer operation. I will note that you asked specifically about the hammer. We have no scenarios that are just the hammer. We're assuming that there are other sources operating. So I can't quantify what just the hammer is at the property line.
Well, I picked just the hammer because that's one of the loudest, my word, pieces of equipment.
Sure. So in figure 5, at the property line, it looks like the highest sound level is around 69 decibels while the hammer is operating. And that is the property line that is on the south side of the railroad tracks, kind of right behind the Allstone office. So
This is figure 32?
Figure 32, yes. Page 67.
Right here.
The dark pink line?
Yeah.
Magenta color.
Yeah, the dark
Magenta.
purple line is 70. That is inside the property line. And then there are these white dashed lines. They're very light. Those represent 1 decibel intervals, so we can count up 1 or 2 to get to the property line, which means that it is 68 or 69 decibels at the worst-case property line location there.
That dashed line that runs parallel to the railroad tracks is the property line?
Those
Yes,
heavier white dash lines.
Yeah.
yes.
There's very faint other lines on there.
Okay. And that South Quarry, North Quarry would be,
So that's South Quarry under existing operations. North Quarry is scenario 2, so that would be page 64, figure 29.
got it.
And so there, the sound level at the property line exceeds 70 decibels. We don't provide sound levels above 70 decibels in these maps, so I can't say how much above 70 it is specifically at that location.
And that goes over the property line?
Yes, it goes over the property line onto Vermont 103.
Okay. And that,
So,
okay, and Chandler,
Oh, that's
no, that's
existing-
Southbrook.
That's existing operation.
page 70 is the hammer for Chandler.
Okay, and that also seems to go beyond the property line.
Yes, yeah, this is right in line with what we were talking about earlier in the textual description within the report. So it exceeds 70 decibels at the property line when the hammer's operating, although I'll also point out that it exceeds 70 decibels. There's a little circle on that map, a little purple circle that's separate. That's from a truck driving on the access road.
I'm not seeing it.
There's a little label there that says Dean Brook Road, and if you go above that label that says Dean Brook Road, there's a purple circle there that is where a truck is on the
Oh.
access road.
Oh, I see.
And so in that case, the purple line also crosses the property line.
Yep. But the operational part would be the purple line that is
The
up
larger
above
purple.
and to the left.
Yeah. So I know you asked about the hammer, but on the following page is a rock drill, the model with the rock drill operating, and it's the same basic shape.
Okay. Thank you. Bob?
Yes, sir. You're recognized.
Thank you. My name's Ray Melanson, I'm a budding landowner. And I guess I forgot what the question was going to be originally. But I wanted you to know that
I'm sorry, could you speak up?
maybe, I've been in the mining business and associated with it for over 50 years. I don't understand a lot of the answers that were given here tonight. I've actually helped Mr. Duncan's people set up sound monitor. I realize how easy it is to game the system. But I didn't understand any of the graphs. And nothing I've heard tonight, nothing I read in the sound report conveys what drove my wife and I out of our house. The percussion is relentless. This is across the road. This is at our house. And you know, you bear with me for 10 seconds of this, you ought to hear 10 hours of it a day until to the point where you can't take it anymore and you have to move out. You have to move out and move somewhere else because you can't take this for 10 hours a day. And you guys want to keep doing this. Your people, you want to keep doing this for years and years to come. I can't even sell this house now. Because what are you gonna show a house when this is going on? I guess I didn't have that one.
When was your sound equipment set up?
You have to speak into the microphone.
And repeat your name if you would.
Gary Goodrich, want to know when your sound assessment was set up, your equipment? What dates?
Sure, and I apologize for not facing you while I'm talking. I'm just trying to get in the microphone here. The sound level meters for background sound level measurements were set up between April 13th and April 21st, 2023.
Okay, why was there so much difference in the same position when you draw hammer was, hydraulic hammer?
on the 20th compared to the 25th?
I'm not aware of a difference.
Sound for the double, for what you're talking about on your assessment.
I mean, I have to apologize. I don't know, I'm not aware of a difference, so I can't speak to it.
See, this is the stuff you don't follow up on compared to what we're listening to. Right?
I mean,
We got the sounds,
would you like me to answer your
but
question?
nobody answers our question on it. April 20th to the 25th, it was totally different. Yes, why would that be? Same piece of equipment, same spot, but the sound was double. Can the engineer answer it?
To the board, I've tried to answer a couple questions, and I'm happy to answer questions, but I'll wait until the questions are done being asked, and then I'll answer.
I think he's sat down, so have you done, are the questions you would like answered? Okay, I'm just wondering if you're done asking the question.
Yeah, so I think the question is related to why did the sound double or become higher between April 20th and April 25th? I don't have any information that makes me aware of that. I'm not aware of that information, so I can't answer a why or even an if that happened.
Are you referencing,
Did the corporation know exactly when these were set up?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Did the Julian Corporation know when you set those machines up?
I don't know if Julian Materials, like the Julian Brothers knew that when we set it up. The Allstone office was aware of when we set them up, but they were not aware of necessarily when we took them down.
Because they can run the equipment different when they know this machine is set up. And if you want to hear the videos we have, we got the dates, I have the dates, time.
I'll ask some questions.
excuse me,
Would you like me to ask some questions to kind of get to the root of that?
I'd like to take a 5-minute recess for us to take a breath here, if that's okay. I'll take a motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, the 5 minutes are up. Please take your seat. Get going? All right. I'm sure there are some more questions to ask the sound engineer. If anybody,
Yeah, if I could just take the lead for a bit.
thank you, Counselor.
Speak into the mic.
You need,
Oh, I will. My voice is at 70 decibels. So, just to finish that discussion, Barry, would you please get a mic in your hand and play your video from April 20th of 2023?
Okay, this one, April 20th.
Is that mic on? I could hardly hear that. Could you hear that over the Zoom?
I can't hear it.
How about that? No, we couldn't hear anything.
And
Play it again.
Steve, why don't you have him come up to use your microphone?
Come on up. You can hear it?
We can hear you, Steve, but
Okay.
he should use your mic.
Show the picture of that to Mr. Duncan that was on that video? Because you filmed it, correct? Wrong, Mr. Duncan. Mr. Duncan's the middle guy.
April 20th. This is right by your side. All the doors tapping.
Okay, now would you please turn to April 25th, 2023? You have a video of that?
April 25th, 10:34. Same spot. 5 days difference.
And could you identify where that was that you were filming?
Right on the border of the North Quarry.
And that's the border of your property?
Yes.
So are you on your property? You have to say something because they need to hear it. Okay. That's good. Thank you, Barry. I
Thank you.
Just to get through that. So a few more questions, and maybe a little too simplistic, but that's me. Could you turn to page 34 of Exhibit J? So just to clarify for me, maybe a few others, the lingo, you talked about 50 decibels being typical background levels of noise. Is that correct?
I'm not familiar, I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Take a look at page 34,
Yes?
and it talks, and you have labels here. A field with insects is around 50 decibels.
Yes, that's correct.
And now if we go from 50 to 60, that seems like it's only a 20% increase. In fact, isn't this scale a logarithmic scale?
It is, that's correct.
So the difference in noise to a human being, if you go from 50 to 60 decibels, is approximately double.
The perceived loudness is double.
And if we go from 60 to 70, we double it again, we double 60.
Yeah, the perceived loudness is doubled, yes.
Well, do you think that we're talking about anything other than perceived loudness by the neighbors?
Well, I have to be clear because the pressure is not doubled, and we are talking about sound pressure levels, so I'm just being clear about what I'm talking about. The rule of thumb is that the perceived loudness in broadband sound is a doubling or halving when we're talking about 10 decibels, depending on what direction we're going.
So if you go above 70 to 80 decibels, you are again doubling the sound, the noise.
You're doubling the perceived loudness, yes.
So let's talk a little bit more about how you were introducing the sound study, and you talked about, really right at the start on page 2, that there was occasional hammering. Now, you heard what Mr. Goodrich just played, and I understand that hammering has been going on from 7 in the morning till 5 at night. Is that occasional if it's going on for 6 days a week?
Yeah, by occasional, I was referring to the fact that the hammering is not occurring all the time at the quarries. It is occurring on some days.
So it's only, and where did you get that information?
From the applicant.
So specifically, the individual that told you that this only occurs on some days a week, who told you that?
I don't recall the specific individual. It's a team project, so I forget who on the team said that it is occurring.
Who was on the team when you got this information?
It would be the two Julian brothers. It would be project counsel, project attorneys, and I believe another staff member of Allstone Quarries.
Did you receive any engineering opinions on what was going on at the sites?
Could you define what you mean by
Sure.
engineering opinions?
Sure. You said you're talking about occasional hammering, and your study here is only meant to be after this, assuming the permits are there, after this project is complete, lowering the south quarry down, putting a big building in, lowering the base down 30 feet, excavating the north quarry down to where it's now just a contractor yard, and changing Chandler from being a processing facility, which it is, into being just a storage area. Your study is at the completion of the project, isn't that correct?
No, the study is talking about both the existing and future scenarios. So it's talking about both.
So in your studies, you're talking about specifically the north quarry, lowering substantial amount of rock in the north quarry during the process.
So the study provides model results both for the existing terrain that is there today and the final terrain that would be as part of the contractor yard.
Did you receive any estimates as to how long it was going to take to go from today's condition to when the project is complete?
It may have come up on one of the team calls, but I don't recall an estimate of time frame.
Did you hear, or do you recall, or does it refresh your memory that the applicant is saying 18 months?
That sounds familiar for some time frame related to the project. I don't know if that's specific to the North Quarry or not, but I have heard an 18-month time frame.
And if it was specific to the North Quarry, the South Quarry, and Chandler Road, do you think that's quite an ambitious time frame to get this project done?
That is outside of my area of expertise to say whether or not it could occur in 18 months.
Did you hear that estimate of 18 months from anyone other than the applicant, meaning any engineers or experts in the field?
Again, I heard it on team calls, and I don't recall specifically who, but I do know that the applicant engineer was on the call.
Do you recall discussions about setting that 18-month projected time frame and whether it should be longer or shorter?
I don't recall that.
Now, you talked about Chandler Road, and it was on weekends. The dB level was about 38, and on weekdays, it would be 48.
Yes, I was talking about the average sound level during the day, on the weekends around 38, and during the weekdays 48.
And this is using the rock hammer at Chandler Road?
It's using whatever is occurring during the monitoring period at Chandler Road.
Was there a rock hammer there during the monitoring period?
Yes, there was.
Was it operating?
Yes, it was.
Do you know when the rock hammer was first operated at the Chandler quarry?
What do you mean by first operating?
When it first was used at that location?
I'm not aware.
You have no information on that?
No, I don't.
So do you understand, did you read the permits for these three quarries?
I searched the permits for the noise-related information and the stuff that's pertinent to my study. I don't know that I've read it in full. I likely did, but I can't say for sure.
Are you aware that the applicants are claiming that the Chandler Road quarry is grandfathered in and does not need, or did not need a permit?
I have heard the applicant refer to it as a non-conforming use.
Without a permit?
I don't know if they've said that or not, but I've heard that it's a non-conforming use. I don't believe it has a permit, but I'm not sure.
Now, your recommendation is to not use the rock hammer at the Chandler Road quarry. Is that correct, or is it to use it very limited?
My recommendation is to either not use the rock hammer at the Chandler Road quarry or to develop a mitigation plan to reduce the sound levels from the rock hammer at the Chandler Road quarry.
Now, did you propose a mitigation plan other than you said to put up a portable, maybe that was for drilling, a portable barrier for drilling?
Yes, we recommended a portable barrier for the drill.
Is there such a thing as a portable barrier for a rock hammer?
Yeah, a portable barrier is not tied to a specific source, so it could be used for other things.
Did you recommend that a portable barrier be used for all future rock hammering?
I did not, no.
Did you consider it?
It's considered in that we said either stop using the rock hammer or develop a mitigation plan, so it could be included in that mitigation plan if needed.
Well, you only did that for the Chandler quarry. You didn't suggest that for the North quarry or the South quarry, did you, for a mitigation plan?
That's correct.
So why didn't you include using a portable barrier to block the sound of the rock hammer in the North quarry and the South quarry while they're doing this extensive excavation to get to the finished project?
It very well could be used for another quarry. It was not recommended in those areas because the existing sound levels are already high and the modeled sound levels from the rock hammer operation are below the existing sound levels that are occurring at those sites.
So now, when we're hearing that rock hammer, will that sound carry further than traffic sounds?
No, not necessarily.
Will it be masked by traffic sounds?
I did not do a masking evaluation, so I can't answer it directly. It may or may not be masked by some.
Well, what good is your report if you're not telling us how use of the rock hammer in the South quarry is going to affect the neighbors that are living with this hammering day in and day out?
The purpose of the report is to project the sound levels from the project, the proposed project, and provide the existing background sound levels of the project, and provide information for a comparison to the applicable standards.
Does the rock hammer sound attenuate as you get further and further away from the source, as compared, much as compared to the sound of traffic?
Yeah, so generally speaking, the sound levels from a rock hammer would attenuate more quickly than the sound levels from traffic. The sound levels from a point source, which is what a rock hammer is, would attenuate every 6 decibels for every doubling of distance. But for a line source like traffic, it would attenuate by 3 decibels per doubling of distance. So generally speaking, traffic noise carries further than these point sources.
So did you do a sound test at the LeClaire property on Chandler Road?
I'm not sure where the LeClaire property is specifically, but we projected sound levels throughout the project area. So I suspect the projected sound levels are included on the property you're speaking of.
Cheryl, if you could play come up here and be by me, and I want you to play from your backyard from various times.
Okay, so this one would be April.
You've got to speak into the mic.
Okay, Cheryl LeClaire, and this would be April 25th, 2023. And this is from my front yard, from my house. I don't know if you can hear it on that.
And
this is
hang on, Cheryl.
Thank you.
What's your address?
129 Clemens Road. This is coming from the South Quarry.
You can see
The South Quarry is, if I look across the road from my property, there's a mountain, and that is where we did the site visit at the South Quarry. They were hammering on the day that I took this video. I also have several others from the South Quarry. And that's a higher level. It bounces off the mountain, and all of us on Clemens Road hear it like very loudly. And sometimes it's 6, 7, 8 hours a day in the summer, or in the winter. I have one here for November. I have one here for, I have probably 40 videos. But that's,
You have to be close to the mic. Now, do you hear the traffic?
no, well, you can see in the background, like if you can see this video closely, you can see cars going by over on 103, and you don't hear a car.
Okay, could you,
Certainly hear,
Cheryl, would the board like to take a peek at that?
I'm gonna stop you here. I'm gonna stop you because I don't know if that's amplified. I don't know the foundation of that video.
Can we get a little foundation? That might help, Steve, a little bit.
You know, it's nice to have.
I know foundation, so.
So,
Cheryl, did you amplify that sound at all?
no, I just had the video on as if I were at a birthday party or if I were videoing you right now at this meeting.
Now,
That's how my phone was.
now, more importantly, did you tinker with that recording and somehow lessen the sound of the traffic, which you can barely hear compared to that rock hammer?
Absolutely not.
Did you give that to any expert, sound person like Mr. Duncan to try to figure out how to downplay the sound of the traffic and increase the sound of the rock hammer?
No, I did not.
Cheryl, you need to say that into the microphone.
Talk with anyone. I did not tamper with my phone. I just went out and put it on video, like I said, as if I were recording any function that I might be at. And I have several.
Steve and Mr. Chairman, those of us on Zoom really can't hear anything from the phone, so perhaps the witness could describe in her words what you all heard in the room?
Go ahead, Cheryl, if you'd speak into the mic.
And Cheryl, it would really help if you could speak right into a mic. Is there a mobile mic anywhere that you could
Yeah.
speak into?
Try that.
Cheryl?
Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and what would you like me to tell you?
Could you describe in your words what you captured on the video? Because none of us could hear any part of the telephone
I
video.
captured the hammer at the South Quarry on April 25th, 2023. I also have several other videos when they are hammering at the South Quarry, and it's very loud at my place of residence, and it's very distracting, it's very annoying, it's very definitely affected our quality of life for the last 3 or 4 years, and that's why we're here.
And what about the traffic?
Pardon me?
What can you hear from about the traffic?
Hold on, Jim.
Sorry.
Jim, hold on, please.
Yes.
I'd like to just, first of all, we all know that a recording on a mobile phone isn't going to give us any hard data that you can use in a controlled experiment. But am I to understand that what you're doing here is you're sharing what I'm getting from this is that the road noise and the hammer all being in the same pocket, but what I'm hearing from you is that you aren't noticing the traffic, but you're noticing the tools and the sound from the
Absolutely.
tools. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And in other words, that the implied volume coming from that hammer or the crusher
And the repetitiveness of it for several hours.
is superseding anything that the environmental readings would be taking.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
That's
Thank you,
helpful.
Jim.
And just a little bit more. How often do you hear that hammering at your house?
It depends on the week. For the last couple of months, they've been fairly quiet. But I have, like I said, several videos, and it may be 2 or 3 days in a row that they are hammering every day for several hours, or it may be a day that they're crushing or scraping. But regardless of what they're doing, it carries across the mountain, and it sounds like it's practically, in our front yard. It's very loud.
Now, did you show Mr. Duncan the photo that was on that video? Do you want to see that? Are you all set?
If I could just see the date, I think
Okay.
I missed that.
Okay, this one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Joe.
Set this right.
Jim, you have
And what was the date of the
That
April.
was April 27th.
Of 2023, correct?
Right, and I mean, I have one here that's June 6th.
Why don't you come up and play it, just to complete the,
And here's one that's August.
just pick June 26th.
Okay, here's June
Speak up,
6th.
speak louder.
This one is June 6th,
2023.
2023.
Put it right
Hang on
next
a
to
minute,
the
let
mic.
me get it started.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. And now, I just heard on that, their frequency, and
August 16th. There's another one.
I just heard that the frequency of the hammering varied in that particular case. You've talked, Mr. Duncan, you've talked about frequency, and I think we're talking about a bunch of different things that are frequency. The pounding of the hammer is not the frequency that you and Jim were talking about, Mr. Dumont were talking about, is it?
I believe the questions that Attorney Dumont and I were talking about was referring to both. I admittedly got a little confused with some of those as well. So I think we were talking about both. So when you're talking about the frequency on that video, let's work that out, specifically which one you're talking about.
Okay, yeah. So how often that the hammer strikes the rock, does it matter what kind of rock it's striking?
Typically no. There is some softer rock that might be quieter, but generally speaking, most rock sounds the same.
Does the frequency of the hammer striking the rock affect the noise level? And I mean by how many times per second the hammer, or per minute the hammer strikes the rock, does that affect the noise level?
Yes, so it could affect the sound levels depending on what metric we're using.
What does that mean?
Well, it depends on whether or not you're looking at the sound levels on a 2-second basis, a 1-second basis, half a second basis.
How about a 5-hour basis?
Yeah, so the frequency at which you hit the rock, the maximum is going to be whatever the maximum is over those 5 hours.
So now, I don't see any in here. Speakers. And if you're in a valley,
There's two right behind you.
okay. Now, not that kind of speaker, come on. If you're in a valley and it's a mountainside and you're pounding these rocks and someone else lives exactly across the valley, is that going to amplify the sound and make it carry further across the valley to people's houses?
No.
Will the frequency in that kind of a terrain affect the sound level?
No, that type of terrain would not affect the frequency.
So is an echo not counted in this level of noise?
Yeah, so there are reflections, but you asked about whether or not it would increase the noise. The issue is that the level of noise that you're experiencing is really the direct sound that's coming from the source. If we're talking about a reflection off of a further distance, like a mountain or something like that, by the time it gets back to the receiver, it is not additive to the sound level that's coming directly from the source. The sound coming directly from the source drowns that out. So the reflection might sound different because different frequencies propagate differently, but it's not a matter of whether or not it's a valley or not. Different frequencies propagate differently in all terrain. So so just as an example, you would likely not hear high frequency sound being reflected back at you because it would be attenuated by the atmosphere. It would be completely absorbed by the atmosphere for long distances. So if you do hear a reflection, you would hear low to mid frequencies.
So is the fact that you would not hear high frequency sounds why Ms. LeClaire's recordings, the hammering far overshadows the vehicles that are on the road unendingly.
Yeah, I think, I can't answer that question directly because I would strongly question the validity of the video and the difference between the traffic sound levels and the hammer sound levels. The reality is when you're recording a video, the algorithms that are recording that audio are meant to amplify speech frequency. So, because when you're recording your kid at their concert, you want to hear the kid at the concert, not the fan that's running in the background. So it's meant to amplify sources that are of interest to us. So the relative difference between traffic and the rock hammer in that video, while it is clear when listening to the video, I can't say that that represents real life of what the person is hearing at the site. I'm not denying the experience for sure. If that's the testimony of the person who recorded the video, that that's exactly what it sounds like, that's their testimony. But I can't speak directly to the relative loudness on the video for those reasons.
So you're suggesting the iPhone is the thing that's designed to hear the rock hammer and record it better than the cars on the highway?
I'm saying that it could be. I know that phones are meant, the audio algorithms on phones are meant to amplify some things and not others. Also, the microphones on phones are not a flat frequency response. I mean, I'm not expecting a resident to have this, but just for the comparison, we're trying to go for accurate measurements using like $10,000 sound level meters that are class 1 and are highly accurate versus an iPhone that gets you within plus or minus 15 decibels. It's just a completely different recording device. So I just have a difficult time speaking to the validity or answering questions about that audio without authenticating it, knowing that it's calibrated, that type of thing.
So you could produce the data that you kept from the sound recordings that you made, or your firm made, at the Leclerc's house in April of 2023, correct? You have that data?
We recorded sound levels, I'm sorry, the Leclerc's house is near Chandler Road?
No, it's Clemens Road.
Clemens Road. There was not a monitor at Clemens Road. We could produce the model results from Clemens Road, but the monitors are the 3 monitors that I spoke about in my direct testimony.
So you never measured on Clemens Road?
We never measured, took a physical measurement on Clemens Road, that's correct.
So you don't know what the sound was like on Clemens Road?
I mean, I know what the projected sound levels from the operation existing and in the future are at Clemens Road.
You know what the guess was based upon experiments or recordings by other engineers in the past in other places with other rocks? And
to be fair, it is clearly not a guess. It is, as I mentioned, a calculation that's conducted by a qualified noise control engineer using international standards for calculating sound propagation outdoors, using models that have been validated over and over again.
So we're using statistics to calculate what it sounds like at Cheryl's house. We're not using actual sound measurements.
No, we're using actual sound measurements as input into a model to calculate the sound pressure levels throughout the project area.
Well, I think you should come and sit at our house.
Yeah, you're welcome to come up, sit at her house on Clemens Road. I just note that, you know, the average person statistically has less than 2 arms, and I know that's not quite right. So I'm just anxious about your data that you're grabbing out of the sky, which other people have put in the sky so you can grab it. But Leclerc's, they live there and they suffer there for all day long. And I'm just asking you, if you're giving a sound report to this board, tell them what is really going on and not what you could dial up with AI on the internet. And that's what scares me, is that we're using what sound experts use, not in this case, but in general, to convince boards to grant permits. And who hires those sound experts? Not the Leclerc's and not the citizens that are hearing the sound. So how much did you charge for your sound study?
I don't think we're going to get into that tonight at the board hearing.
I have no more questions.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Priscilla Melanson, does the board take into effect the effect on property values for a project like this? Because because I know we cannot sell our house at what it was originally estimated at with this going on, and I just don't know if that is part of your deliberation when you're thinking about offering permits for an operation like this. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm sorry? Go ahead, sir. Matthew?
Okay, I wasn't sure if you were talking about me or not.
You're the only Matthew there.
So I live where my bedroom is literally in visual distance of the gate into Chandler Road. I'm curious if the sound study picked up any activity on the access road to the Chandler facility after hours. Because I know I can often hear both ATVs and trucks pull up after 9 o'clock at night.
Would the board like me to answer that?
Yes.
Yeah. No, the sound study did not pick up any after-hour activity at the access road to Chandler Road.
I don't know if you heard the answer, Matthew?
I did.
Okay.
My second question is more general. So I can normally hear the backup signals from the equipment that work in the quarry at my residence, in my bedroom. Is there a reason why I would hear those but not the blast horns for when they're about to blast?
I think that's a really great question, and I would be interested in the answer to it. I honestly don't know the answer to that question, why you would hear backup alarms and not a blast horn.
Thank you, because it is very rare when they blast I hear the horns, so I just wanted to see if there was a reason for that. Thank you very much.
Sorry, the only thing I might hypothesize about that is the blast horns might happen less frequently, so there's a good chance you may not be there when the blast horns are going off. So I'm not saying that you are or aren't, but that's a possibility of why you might notice backup alarms and not blast horns.
Well, I'm here when the blast happens.
Very good.
Excuse me, Phil. Excuse me, Phil. The gentleman,
I just want to put a couple of things in layman's terms, because I didn't understand half what was said here tonight, believe me. And if what I was hearing, and I probably wasn't hearing correctly, the noise level that I heard described by these folks, I wouldn't be here, believe me, if that was the case. In layman's terms, I know the difference between a air pistol and an AK-47, and they sound a great deal different. And believe me, I've been out sitting on my back deck and heard something that made me duck. Blasting, number one, and hammer drilling that can be rapid like a machine gun, AK-47. And if you want to come in and sit on my back porch and watch the ducks, I would love to have you do that. And I want somebody operating that AK-47 hammer over there that's going to display what that machine actually does, not what it doesn't do. And I guess that's all I'm going to talk about tonight, but thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I'm John Novak. I live across Dean Brook Road from the This man here has questioned the validity of the sounds and the videos off of a phone, and I'm just wondering how you know your equipment's any good. I saw one of your people out on Chandler Road one day, and all the equipment was in the back end of a pickup truck. And to me, on a back road, a pickup truck's going to do some bouncing, and I'm just wondering how you know that your equipment is accurate.
Yeah, that's a great question. So our equipment is laboratory calibrated on a yearly basis and field calibrated before and after every measurement that we're conducting. So those calibrators that are used are also calibrated by a laboratory on a yearly basis. So we know that the sound level that we're putting into the microphone, we know what that sound level is, and we can see on the microphone, the sound level meter, that it is recording what the calibrator is recording. So there are standard procedures for calibrating this equipment. And again, as I mentioned, it's a class 1 sound level meter, which is about as accurate as you can get. The only thing more accurate is class 0, and those are only used in laboratories. A class 1 sound level meter is accurate to within plus or minus 0.4 decibels, if I'm remembering correctly.
Okay, another question. I don't understand why we weren't notified when you were monitoring this noise to come where the noise really is. Like my back lawn, for one place. They've played music over there, and they play it so loud because it's so loud over there. But when it hits me, I think it's louder than what it is over there. And actually, it's not funny, because if somebody come over to my house and gave me any shit about that, there's going to be problems, because I'll just say, I mean, I get so angry by listening to that. And I don't think you guys did a very good job in your monitoring. When I talked to this young fellow that worked for you, he was 150 yards up the road where there's no noise. Maybe the frogs were chirping a little bit, but that's all. If he went back down the road 150 yards, he'd have been in the thick of things. Or he could have offered to come right up in my yard. But then again, they knew you were doing it, so they weren't making that much noise that particular day. I guess that's all I've got.
That's John Novak. I just wanted the record to report. He's a neighbor.
Could you give us an address as well?
And the address is, go ahead, your address, John?
25 Prusak Mountain Road.
Thank you.
And if I could just ask a follow-up question on that.
Okay.
So the workers at the Chandler Road quarry, they would all be wearing ear protection, sound protection? Is that correct, when this equipment is running, or they should be?
It depends on what you mean by this equipment. I think there is equipment that's running at the site that does, and some that does not require hearing protection. So I can't speak to the OSHA or MSHA application at the site.
You're a sound guy, aren't you?
Well, you're asking me to speak for what the actual practice is at the site. That's not the purpose of this study.
Right.
This is a community noise study, not an employee OSHA study.
So you have different scenarios at the back of Exhibit J with different equipment running. Could you go through that list? And do you know where or ear protection or hearing protection is required for these different items of equipment that you've listed in your 17 scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, it's outside the scope of our work. I don't know where it's required within their facility.
So you don't know?
Not off the top of my head, no.
So would it be fair to say that if someone has ear protection on, that they shouldn't have the radio loud enough so that they can hear the radio over the hearing protection?
I mean, common sense, yes.
Well, we're not measuring that, all right? We're trying to get a permit for this this quarry operation. But isn't that a condition that should be applied, that if someone has to have hearing protection on, that they should not be running the radio loud enough to hear it?
I think it's up to the board to decide what they want for a condition. That could certainly be
Thank you.
something
No
for
more questions,
consideration.
sorry.
I'm sorry,
Thank
I
you,
was still providing my answer.
Thank you. Phil, you had a question?
I'd like just to briefly follow up on blasting. Your study doesn't take that into account?
It does not, no.
Okay. Do we know how frequently at each study, at each quarry, blasting is done?
I don't know off the top of my head how frequently blasting is done. Drilling is conducted leading up to blasting, so blasting would occur shortly after drilling is occurring. So
Okay,
we could look to how frequently drilling occurs.
Okay, how frequently do they drill?
I also don't know that answer off the top of my head, but let me check the report to see if it's in there.
Can I just make these are the kind of questions that we were hoping there'd be some representation from the company to give us answers for, because we're here to have information. How often are you blasting? We're not getting those answers, and we're trying to get an overall view of things. So it's frustrating not to be able to get answers to simple questions. Right.
All right, let's skip that point. Let's talk about blasting noise versus rock hammering noise. I assume that blasting is at a much lower frequency. That's sound frequency and also occurrence frequency. So could you talk about the loudness dynamics of blasting versus some of the other sources we've been looking at?
Yeah, I could speak to it a little bit. Blasting does not follow the same physics as this type of sound. It's air over pressure. So it is a kind of a different thing altogether, and really would be spoken to by a drilling and blasting expert. So the information about noise from blasting is typically covered by a drilling and blasting expert, and also in a drill and blast plan. So that's why it's not covered here. It's also an infrequent source. I know we couldn't define that here specifically, like how frequently, but that's why it's also not covered under this assessment. Is it's different physics, and it's also so infrequent compared to all of these other sources that are occurring.
If by happenstance your meters were running when a blast went off, would it have picked it up?
Yes, so we would have been able to measure that a blast went off.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Cheryl, you had a question?
Just for information, I did call the Julian office one day and asked them if they would please call me the next time they were going to blast. When they blasted on this one day, I was between two horses filling their water buckets, and when the blast went off, my horses almost jumped on top of me. So that's how loud it was on that day. And we have heard blasting several times that we're like, wow, what was that?
Without notification, email, text?
They don't know. And years ago, Greg, who owned it, did used to give us a call occasionally and say, we're going to blast. And they didn't blast very often, but he did call us and tell us when he was going to. But in this situation, no, the Julians have never notified us when they're going to blast.
Thank you.
Yeah, also on the blasting, that we weren't notified. Nobody was notified. The state, the railroad, nobody was notified. And all the rocks landed on the tracks. They went across the river, they hit up on the 103. So, like I said, nobody's notifying anything. of blasting.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions this evening? We have a stop in 12 minutes. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Roberta Alexander. I thought Attorney Dumont had a good question pertaining to the fact that, do we know whether the Julians have the right to use the equipment that is making the loud noise? Is it part of one of their permits? And I don't think really that that was your job, but I do think that that's something that we as people in the town should know. Do they have the right to use the equipment, all of the equipment that they now have, under the permits that they also have? Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else comments this evening? I'm going to take a motion to recess the hearing.
So moved.
Moved by Harry.
We gotta, if you indicate the date, just to make sure we got.
Do we have a date?
On the record, I think we do.
Oh, please share with us. So,
23rd?
oh, we have another hearing to be continued on October 23rd at 6 o'clock.
Preston, is that right? It is. October 23rd at 6.
Yep.
So recessing to a date certain of October
Yes.
23rd at 6 o'clock here at the town hall.
Yep. Do I have a second to that motion?
Second.
Second by Phil. Any discussion?
I need to make sure somebody else is making the motion. 'Cause I'm not on-
Harry made the motion.
You made it?
Yep.
Jeez, I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. I was too close.
Any discussion regarding the recess? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight.
Thank you.